first speaker that we're going to have up is Paul.
Thanks a lot, Hazel. On Friday, I met with a family who I've been helping for the last year and a half or so. He approached me first when they got a notice to quit. They're on the council housing list now for 10 years. They got a notice to quit from a landlord who wants to sell the property, and I've been helping the family. For a while, the council suggested that they were open to buying it under the tenant in situ scheme, which would have been an ideal solution for them. But then, a couple of months ago, the council said, no, we're not going to buy the property. We went to the RTB, and at the RTB we won effectively a stay of execution. Because he had been in this potential tenant in situ scheme, they agreed not to evict him immediately, but instead to put off the date of eviction until the end of February. But that is now really fast approaching for him. He was in the office on Friday, and he just said to me, we cannot go into emergency homeless accommodation. He has really serious health issues. He's recovering from surgery. His daughter has really serious health issues. And it is just unthinkable for him that they will survive in the situation of trying to be in a hotel room or in a so-called family home. So they're desperate. They're not holding out for some luxurious property. They will take anything at all. And he told me the other day that they've applied for over 400 properties on DAFT. So any possible thing that is within what they can afford, they're applying for it. They applied for over 400 properties on DAFT. He's gotten 4 responses back. Just 4. And all 4 responses were simply responses to say, the property's already gone. So it just gives a glimpse of just how desperate the situation is out there. And unfortunately, he and his family are nowhere near alone. They are one side of this housing crisis affecting literally hundreds of thousands of families. We know the absolute scandal of over 4,000 children growing up in hotel rooms, growing up in homeless hubs, having a long-term impact on their lives. We know about the over 500,000 young people stuck at home, simply unable to afford to move out. We know of all the families who are forced to pay, scrimp and save to pay over €2,000 a month to pay for rent, with no prospect of either having security of tenure or of being able to put aside money and to be able to get a deposit and be able to get a mortgage and afford somewhere to buy. We know of the families who have their mortgages being hiked up by hundreds of euros by profiteering banks who are struggling to keep their head above the water. All those people, the majority of people in society, in one way or another, affected negatively, of course, by the housing crisis. But it's important, I think. We should not forget there is another side to the housing crisis. This is not just some horrendous natural disaster that has befallen society, where we all are losing from this housing crisis. The other side of the housing crisis is those who are profiteering from human misery. And the two sides are related. The corporate landlords who are experiencing record rents is the other side of the families who cannot afford the €2,000 plus for rent. IRES REIT, Hibernia REIT, between them they own thousands of properties, 2 of the biggest landlords in the state. And between them, they made revenue of over €100 billion last year. That revenue is a transfer of wealth from working people paying unaffordable rents and indirectly from the state in the form of half of over €1 billion a year to private corporate landlords. The private developers are the other big winners here. Cairn Homes recently announced their profits for the first 6 months of this year. And do you know what way their profits went when the majority of people are suffering from the housing crisis, when homelessness goes up and up and up, and house prices go up and up and up? They announced increased profits of over 100%. So they more than doubled their profits the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year. Profits of over 60 million euros. And at the heart of the housing crisis is a very, very simple truth. We have a government that represents those who profit from the housing crisis, not those who suffer from the housing crisis. We have a government of landlords for landlords. And at a certain stage you cannot believe their professions anymore that they want to deal with the housing crisis. When Fine Gael has been in power now for almost 5,000 days in a row, the idea that we would believe them when they say, oh no, we're just looking for the best way to deal with the housing crisis. No. A system ultimately does what it is designed to do. And you have to draw the conclusion that this system is not designed to give people homes, but this system is instead designed to enrich the private landlords, the corporate developers, those who are at the very top of our society, and that's who Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are quite consciously representing. And it is why they are trying desperately to distract from that truth. It's why they're trying to distract from the fact that people are profiting from the housing crisis and their responsibility for the housing crisis. It's why Simon Harris in particular engaged in a disgusting scapegoating lie to suggest that asylum seekers were in some way responsible for the increase in the housing list when there is simply no iota of truth to that whatsoever. And then people have to draw the conclusion that if Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are returned, as of course they want to be, well then we know which way the story will go. The record house prices will go even higher. The record rents will go even higher, and the record numbers of homeless people will go even higher. And on the other side of the balance sheet, the record profits for the corporate landlords and the record profits for the private developers will also rise. And we have evidence for that in the budget, which has not a single extra cent for any additional social and affordable housing, and instead continues tax breaks to landlords, the so-called Help to Buy scheme, which is in reality a Help to Profit scheme introduced because of lobbying from the Construction Industry Federation, and the continuation of various grant schemes that supposedly incentivise the private developers to build the homes that we need. We know what the alternative is, and the alternative is very, very simple, and actually something that the majority of people, I think, will agree with the essence of. And it starts with putting the right of people to a home before the so-called right of the banks to profit, of the corporate landlords to profit, and of the private developers to profit. And that sounds like a very, very simple thing, a very, very modest thing. But in order to do so, it means reversing the whole trend of commodification of housing, reversing the idea that this is something for a profit to be made out of, and instead saying people's right to a home, people's need to a home should come first, and that means fundamentally reorganising our society and our economy. Saying that our economy, our society should not be based on the maximisation of profit for those who currently control wealth, because that's what reliance on the capitalist market means. Instead, we need to build an economy and a society based on the deliverance and ensurance that people's needs are met, and that is something that absolutely can be done. What that looks like is a reinstatement of the eviction ban immediately, to mean that families, like the family I am dealing with, and the thousands of others who are faced with the horrifying threat of being made homeless, are immediately left in their homes. It means use it or lose it legislation to stop the scandal of 50,000 homes sitting vacant across the country for more than 6 years at a time when we have almost 100,000 people on housing waiting lists, over 14,000 people in emergency accommodation. It means rent controls to bring rents down to affordable levels. And above all, it means using the Apple money to build a state construction company. To not rely on the market, but instead public ownership, democratic control to deliver social and affordable housing. Incidentally, how we deal with the housing crisis also relates to the climate crisis. Because that state construction company should also have free, no cost retrofitting of people's homes to reduce energy usage and give people warmer homes. Also the vacant properties. Just to finish, we want to fight for a left government to implement socialist policies. We have to raise hopes that that could be achieved. One way or the other, we need a movement on housing. Obviously, all of us have been involved in pushing and fighting for a movement on housing, but it is needed now more than ever. To fight against those who are responsible for the housing crisis, both economically and politically, but also to unite people, to give people a sense that it doesn't make sense to blame the most vulnerable for the housing crisis, but instead to feel confident in the power that we have, as we felt at the time of the water charges, that we can take these people on and that actually we can resolve the resources that exist in our society to resolve the crisis. And so that is on all of us, but also on the trade union movement, to say we need mass protests, trade union action on the issue of the housing crisis, because ultimately we need to end the rule of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and the economic interests that they represent. Thank you.
So there's not a community in Ireland that's not touched by this crisis, and we're going to hear a little bit more from Cork North Central TD for Solidarity, Nick Barry next. So Nick, over to you.
So, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael want the people to give them another chance. They want another chance on housing. But rents are at record highs. Homelessness is at a record high. The number of kids in emergency accommodation is at a record high. And a generation is being locked out of the housing market. Do they deserve this second chance that they're asking for? No, they do not. Show them the door at the general election. For nearly 14 years now, Fine Gael have been in the government. For nearly 9 years now, Fianna Fáil have either been in the government or have been supporting the government. And their failure is not a mistake. Because this is a government which represents the landlords, the developers and the speculators. They do not represent the renters, the people in the box rooms or the mortgage payers. When I look across the Dáil chamber at the Fianna Fáil benches, what do I see? I see a lot of landlords. For every 3 Fianna Fáil TDs, 1 is a landlord. When I look across at the Fine Gael benches, what do I see? For every 4 of them, 1 of them is a landlord. My God, Budget 25 was a real opportunity. A state surplus of 25 billion, Apple tax of 14, hundreds of billions of wealth and profits that remain untaxed in this state. A government with vision and with teeth, prepared to take on Ireland's super wealthy, could have produced a budget to transform society. On housing, we could have had a state-run construction company. A company with a laser-like focus on delivering social and affordable housing. Slashing the price of a house for young people by eliminating land costs building on public land. Slashing the price still further by operating on a not-for-profit basis. A real potential solution to the housing crisis. Housing for people, not for profit. The government had an open goal with the ball at their feet, but they decided to shoot wide. They decided instead to throw more money at the landlords, to throw more money at the developers, and to carry on with the same old, same old. Einstein once said, I believe, he didn't say it to me, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. The market didn't deliver before, and it won't deliver now. Break the domination of the housing profiteers for a state construction company operating for social need, not human greed. now. Talking about the price of housing. The average price of a house in Cork City now is €354,000. That's an increase of more than €100,000 since the start of the pandemic. With prices increasing by more than €20,000 a year, how the hell are young workers expected to be able to save? How are young people expected to be able to buy a home? In Shandana, Richard's area, one of the houses that have been sold there on the government's official affordable scheme, nearly €350,000. In Oscar Traynor Road, between 400 and 475,000. And Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael say that those are affordable houses. They are in my neck. Another sign that this is a government of landlords. Did you see what they sneaked in the budget during the week? They increased the tax relief for landlords. And if you add the new tax relief on top of the one in budget 2024, there's €160 million per annum being gifted to landlords by this government. That's in place from here up until 2027, and Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael lead the next government, I've no doubt that it will be renewed past that point. I said that homelessness is at record numbers. 14,500 people and more in emergency accommodation, many for more than a year, some for more than 2 years, and included among that number 4,500 children. Of course, the real figure is much higher, because you see, they don't count the people who are couch surfing. They don't count the women in the refuges. They don't count the people in direct provision and other groups as well. And the effect that this has on ordinary people. Therapists and experts now tell us that children growing up in emergency accommodation are speaking at a later age than is normal in the case because of the traumas that they have been forced to go through. Young people are learning to walk at a later age because how do you learn to crawl when you're in a cramped hotel bedroom or in a bed and breakfast? This is the scandalous effect of the class policies of these parties. And don't let them ever tell you that the people to blame for this situation are the asylum seekers, that the people to blame for this situation are the refugees, the way that Harris was hinting, and more than hinting at, in his interview there a week and a half ago. It wasn't the asylum seekers and the refugees who voted to lift the eviction ban. It was Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and it was clear as day at the time that you lift the eviction ban and the numbers in emergency accommodation will go up month after month after month. That is exactly what has happened. So let's push back against the scapegoating that's happening on that front. Vacant houses. In the 2022 census, there were 167,000 vacant houses in this state. But how many of them were vacant for at least 6 years? 48,000 houses there. They try and make out that all of these homes are owned by old people in nursing homes. Some of them are, but it is a minority. It is not the majority of the cases. Very many of those vacant homes are owned by speculators. And we are in favour of use it or lose it taxes. And we're in favour of the people who don't pay those taxes, those properties being taken into public ownership in the interest of a society and added to our social housing stock. Just want to say a brief word on the question of mortgages. Hasn't got too much of a mention yet. I want to say a word about it. But I discovered recently actually where the word mortgage came from. I'm sure there's people in the room here whose French is better than mine. But I knew that mort was death. I didn't know that gauge was grip. mortgage is literally death grip. And that is the reality for huge numbers of homeowners in our society who are paying mortgages at an average rate, many are paying more than this, of 4.11%, which is well above the European average. Who are they paying those mortgages to? Banks and financial institutions, which made profits of more than €5 billion in this state last year. We're in favour of a cap on mortgages, make the bank pay the costs of the increased interest there. And we're in favour of the reversal of the privatisations that have taken place and the nationalisation of the banks. Not nationalisation to bail out the rich, as was done during the Great Recession, but nationalisation under the control and management of working people and for the benefit of society. I'm looking at the clock. I've spoken for 9 minutes and 15 seconds. So with the indulgence of the chair, I'll finish by saying what we need a social movement on housing that would rock any Conservative government carrying out these policies, like we did with the water charges. We need a left government, but not a government that is left in name only, a government that's prepared to take on the profiteers and end the dictatorship of the market in housing and in our society. In other words, a genuinely democratic, genuinely human, and genuinely left and socialist government. Thank you.
I appreciate you being very diligent at the time. There's not many people, and it's sometimes hard to cheers and speakers to hold down them.
That's no problem, Count Corley.
I'm going to move to some speakers from the floor before I move the resolution. Is John here? He's going to speak from the floor, and I'm going to yourself down the back and side after that. Then I'll get you in a minute.
Hi, John Burchell, Social Party, Dublin West. Ruth and Mick and Paul spoke about, individual cases, tragic housing cases. And most of my work as a councillor is involved with housing cases. It's the front line of the class war in Ireland, and there's victims strewn all over Irish society. I groan inwardly when people contact me, with the desperate situation they find themselves in. Homelessness, overcrowding, appalling conditions, private landlords, leaving families living in squalor. None of this is an accident, and we must understand that it has been carefully engineered by our governments over several decades to commodify housing. Sometimes they'll take a non-interventionist approach, for example with Airbnb. You look on Daft, you see hundreds of Airbnbs for rent in, Blanchardstown and surrounding areas, and you ask Fingal, what kind of enforcement measures have you got in place to make sure they're registered? And the answer is none, really. They depend on the public to report suspected, violations. So we're meant to undertake the investigations ourselves, and then they might look at it, So non-interventionist, if that benefits the profiteers, and heavily interventionist, also for the same reason. We see it with HAP. The homeless HAP payment in Fingal is $1,875 a month. So it works to prop up rental prices. That everybody has to compete at levels above that. So, no accident. Of course, we need a state, massive state intervention. We've identified 2 land banks in Dublin West, Churchfields. 7 years ago we started the campaign, and the first few phases have come on stream now. The affordable houses are €320,000, modest houses, this is what they call affordable. So again, the state is intervening to prop up, extortionate housing prices. So people can't afford 320,000, so Fingal will give you the additional money to buy the unaffordable house. But what we need is, massive state intervention to break the power of the market. Currently, what we have is what I think of as anti-public spending. So, the headline figures for housing, for healthcare, they tell you nothing about the experience of people on the ground. Because the money is being diverted into the hands of profiteers to do very badly or fail to do at all the jobs that the state should be doing. So we see it, for example, in the National Children's Hospital. Bam, the gangsters, extracting 2 billion from the public purse. So, finally, to close up, as the guys have said, what we need is a mass movement on housing, like the mass movement that's developed on the streets outside for Gaza, that march past the Gresham Hotel here yesterday, massive march. That's what we need on housing. Militant mass movement on housing to drive the profiteers and their pet government back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sive, I'm 26, I'm living in the Dublin Midwest area in Dalkey and Lucan. I'm renting and I'm spending over a third of my income on my rent. I think it's really important right now that we point out the hypocrisy of this government and of the far right who want to point the finger of blame at migrants. They want to tell me that they're the reason that my rents are so high. It's not because 1/3, as it's been pointed out, 1/3 of government TDs are landlords. The far right want to say that the people I should be afraid of are the migrant men who are living on the streets, who are much closer to my experience than the landlords who are, profiteering from my wages. At the end of the day, the people that I fear is my landlord, who threatens eviction every time I ask for a basic repair. That's an Irishman, not an immigrant on the street. I think it's important as well to say that at the moment in this country, there's, as it's been pointed out, 166,000 vacant properties, 50,000 that have been empty for 6 years or more. In Dublin Midwest, what we did locally is we tried to highlight those vacant properties in our area. We went around with petitions in our community and we pointed them out. We brought it to the council and we asked for those properties to be compulsory purchase ordered and house people who are on the housing list. Fianna Gael, Fianna Fáil, Green Party and Labour Party voted against this, despite the fact that this is something that is desperately needed. In my community last year, when the eviction ban was overturned by the government, almost 200 households were evicted into homelessness. 200 households registered with homeless services in our community after the eviction ban was lifted. That is the fault of this government, and it's the fault of everyone who has voted against real measures on housing. Those measures should include real rent controls. It is insane. I will never be able to buy a house in this country while I'm spending over a third of my income on rent. That is not acceptable. It's not affordable for the basic normal people. Most of my friends are moving abroad to Germany, to Australia, to Canada, wherever they can afford to live, to buy a house. They're leaving this country when they don't want to and they don't have to. I think it's also important to say that in my community, where I live and work, there is huge amounts of, if you go to council estates, there's huge amounts of vacancies in those estates. At a time when we have massive amounts of people on housing lists, 60,000 or more people waiting on housing lists, we have a council that has slowed down in terms of producing housing, that has slowed down in terms of putting housing that is no longer in use back on stream. In South Dublin County Council, it used to take 9 weeks to refurbish a house that had been given back to the council for whatever reason. 9 weeks. Now it takes 22 weeks. But the reality is, when you're canvassing in these estates, those houses have been left empty for 9 months, a year and a half. And people ask, why are they empty? My sister is in a homeless home at the moment. She's been waiting for a house in this community for the last 12 years, her and her kids. Yeah. And so what I want to say about this is, we can't just wait for this government to act. We have to act in our communities, in our workplaces. We have to, when our neighbour is getting evicted, we have to stand with them against the landlords, and we have to point the finger of blame at the people who it belongs to. The government, the landlords, the bankers, the speculators. Thank you. Thanks. Resolution number 2 that we're going to be taking after the speaker, and then I'm going to allow the Mick and Paul to come in for the last 2-3 minutes so we can stay on time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep it brief if you don't mind.
I'll keep it brief, as brief as I can. Frank Gates from People Before Profit in Bray, County Wicklow. We're not asking for the impossible. What we're suggesting has been done before. 100 years ago, and that's only 20 years before I was born. It's not that long. 100 years ago, this country came into existence when the capitalist state, the Free State, was given power handed to it by the old imperialist British, with the help of Winston Churchill and other friends of Ireland. The people who took that power knew exactly what they had to do. And they built houses not for profit, but to supply the great and grave need, which was 10 times worse than now in 1920s Ireland. The worst slums in Europe. In the city centre, outside the city centre, they built Marina. They built Cromwell. And they hadn't got a bean. This country opened its books with nothing, no money. But they circulated money by doing a very sensible thing. They commenced a building programme of public housing on a not-for-profit basis. And it worked. By the time I was a child in the 40s and the 50s, there were lots and lots of estates around the place, particularly in Dublin, but in other cities too. So this works. It has worked, and we're not taught about that in school. And our friends in the media, who I'm glad to see here today, but I hope they're going to go away from this and start telling the truth. Our friends in the media need to be telling the truth about the history of our economy, the history of our political skullduggery, and the lies we are being told throughout the time. Remember, it's been done before. In the 1920s, public housing was established as a tradition in this state, and it needs to be done again. And if we give leadership, it can be.
Resolution number 2. I'm not going to read the full thing out because everybody got a copy of it, yeah? Is that okay? So I'm going to take a vote on those that are in favour of resolution 2. Okay, anybody that's against it? Okay, that resolution has passed. Thanks everybody. So I'm going to invite Paul back up for, well, we're just in time, Paul. Let's make a show of everyone else to show them how we can finish on time. All right? 3 minutes.
I'll just make 2 quick points, sorry, in response to the discussion. Thanks, Hazel. One is in relation to what John said. I think it's actually a very important point. And there's a lot of discussion now about public waste. And you can see the right wing trying to use this argument to suggest that, like, the state can never deliver anything. Because people, when we say we should have a state construction company, right-wing people, right-wing commenters say, psh, sure, look at what's happening with the children's hospital. Yeah? Look at what's happening with the Children's Hospital. This is not a state construction company. This is a major contractor, BAM, who has gotten the contract from the state and is ripping the taxpayer off, not in my words, in the words of Stephen Donnelly. The same thing is true in terms of the bike shelter. The bike shelter is being built not by the OPW, because the OPW doesn't do this stuff in-house anymore. It's being done by Sensori Facilities Management, a company set up by Michael Stone, a political ally of Pascal Donoghue, the man who got his posters up for free in the last elections and avoided declaring it by all sorts of reverse engineering, creative accounting, saying that the work was worth this much and this was a donation to Fine Gael, and the post of the ladders of the Times worth this much and this is a donation to Pascal Donoghue, amounts that all magically, perfectly came under the legal limits for donations for both to the party and to Pascal Donoghue. And you will have, with your eyes become open to Sensori, you'll see their vans all around town doing all the work that used to be done by the state. And they're not just involved in the Oireachtas. You go into a school, you will find that the maintenance man that used to be there isn't there anymore. Because instead, it's outsourced to Sensori. And so, instead of there being someone who's there, fixing stuff as they go, making the schools work properly. No, it's more efficient that we have Sensori, and when something goes wrong, you call them, and then you have a massive bill of thousands of euros, and supposedly it saves you money, but in the end, the public ends up paying more for this, and you have massive profiteering. The same is going to be the case in terms of the security vote, that there's a massive amount, and this is exactly it. They talk about all the state spending that's taking place, but they don't talk about the fact that the state is being stripped of the ability to actually do any of these things, and instead it's money that passes through the hands of the state and then into the hands of big corporations who profit from these things on the double. The other point I just briefly make is in relation to Si's point, which is very important, about the need to be united, about the need not to allow them to sow division and to misdirect people's anger against vulnerable people who are also suffering from the same system as the rest of us are suffering from. And I just would warn people that immigration as an issue has dropped now in the opinion polls. It's decisively down again in the opinion poll published today. And have no fear. The government is going to try to play this card hard in the coming weeks and try and get it back up the polls. In the run-up to the local elections, non-stop, chasing asylum seekers up and down the canal, not giving them anywhere to stay, but instead wanting to be seen to be hard, and what was being suggested was the reason that we had a housing crisis. Obviously complete nonsense. Performative cruelty after performative cruelty against Ukrainian refugees, against asylum seekers, cutting their benefits, threatening to means test them, trying to evict them, and then actually adding to the homeless numbers on that basis by literally evicting asylum seekers, or not even asylum seekers, those who have been accepted, those who have refugee status. Performative cruelty that makes life no better for anyone else in this country, just makes life harder for them. And so we should be prepared. The government's going to do the same stuff in the run-up to the general election, hoping to distract attention. We have the hope, and I think people are a bit tuned into this now. I think Simon Harris didn't really get away with it. It didn't work for him the way that he expected it to when he tried to blame asylum seekers a couple of weeks ago. We have to remind people the truth about that we had a housing crisis well before a significant increase in asylum seekers and refugees going into this country, and the responsibility for the housing crisis lying with Fianna Fáil, lying with Fine Gael, and the class of corporate landlords and private developers that they represent. Thank you.
And just to say, the session that's going to be coming on after this is standard as an ultimatum, so I'm sure we'll have a short break, but don't go far because it's going to be a very important conversation. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Hazel. I'll keep it brief, okay? So, the Housing Commission and the Central Bank, hardly pillars of radical left-wing thought, either one of them, say that the state needs to build 60,000, 70,000 houses a year. What we're being told here is that we have a permanent housing crisis now, so long as this country relies on the private market and capitalism to deal with the housing situation. The private sector does not have the capacity to build that number of houses. The only way that it can be done is on the basis of the state, a state construction company, and building for people, not for profit. I agree strongly with the points that the comrade made about the social housing that was built when this country was poor, and what happens now when we're told that the country is rich. Can't keep up 15,000 people in emergency accommodation. They come back at us and they say that, well, if you build social housing, you'll be building concrete jungles. Well, that does not necessarily have to be the case by any means. The skills, the technology, the expertise is there to build fine housing estates with parks, community centres, with trees and green space. And by the way, let's get rid of that cap on social housing. So that social housing is not saying, oh well, you go for that if you're below a certain income. There are loads of people in this society who need social housing, who want social housing, who are told you're not eligible. Right? And they should be eligible, that's the way it is. In other European countries, it's the way it should be here. And look at Hazel tapping her toe there. So I will conclude on this simple point. You look at the HAP situation. The amount of money that's being given to the landlords, whereas if the state was investing, that would be a real genuine investment, not just in people, but in rents and incomes coming back to the state. So once again, it underlines the fact what we have is a government who represents the landlords, the property developers and speculators. We need a government that represents the renters, the people in the box rooms, the people who are paying the mortgages, the ordinary working people of this country, and that's what we're going to go out and fight for in the weeks ahead. Thank you.
Thanks. I've been told we're going straight into the next session, but I'm going to allow you to respond to an outlook because I'm not that bad of a